Hey everyone, Josh Larson here with the Rage Real Estate team, and today I want to talk about wealth building through real estate. And to do that, I want to look at it through two different lenses. First, the impact of inflation on housing. If you look at this graph, you'll see the impact of inflation on a whole lot of things. The most expensive things being medical expenses and education expenses. Those two are the hardest hit by inflation, and that's where people feel inflation the most. All the way down to the bottom, you'll see things like toys and big screen TVs. Those are the least impacted by inflation. In fact, it's cheaper to buy a flat screen now during this really high inflation than it probably ever has been. Right in the middle of that spectrum, you'll see housing. And so you'll see, yes, housing payments are impacted by inflation, but not as drastically as a lot of other things. In fact, the housing impact is pretty much right in the middle of the pack when it comes to inflation's impact. The second lens we want to look at is overall housing, owning a home versus renting a home. This chart here shows three different scenarios. The first being home ownership. So let's just take a look at that one. Over the course of 10 years, if you were to take your money and invest it in a down payment on a home and buy a home and keep that asset for 10 years, you'll see at the bottom of that first column what you would walk away with as your overall investment. The second column shows renting and taking 100% of the difference between your rent payment and what a mortgage payment would be, and just investing that money. Because you're going to need to, you'll have a housing payment no matter what you do, whether you own a home or rent. And sometimes renting can seem cheaper. And so if you took 100% of that difference and invested it and just continued to invest it over the course of 10 years, the bottom of that second column shows you that you'd have half as much as you would have if you had owned a home for that same amount of time. And then the third column just shows if you only saved 10% of that difference between a rent payment and a housing payment, but you saved it, and you saved it diligently over the course of 10 years, you'd have more than you did when you started with, but not nearly as much as you would have if you had owned a home for that same period of time. So here's three things to keep in mind. First of all, your first home is not typically going to be your forever home. So most of the time, people stay in their first home for an average of 7 to 10 years, and then they move up to a larger home, or they move out of state. But the average is owning that asset for 7 to 10 years. When you go to buy your next house, you can either sell that home and use the equity to purchase your next home, or you can keep that home as a long-term rental, and that becomes the first property in your real estate portfolio as a rental property. Second thing to consider is in real estate, just like in many things, slow and boring tends to win the race. So if you can buy the home, if you can get into home ownership now, the sooner you can do that, typically speaking, the better for you. And over the long haul, you're going to be glad that you did that. Third, even if right now is not the time for you to buy a home, we would still love to have a conversation with you about when it might be the right time, even if that's 2 years or 3 years down the road. Just having the conversation, we have found, is helpful for people to start getting their mind around the sorts of things they need to do, the steps they need to take over the next 2 to 3 years to be in an optimal position to buy a home. And that's what we're here for, and we would love to help you with that. So, if you have any questions about any of this information or about buying a home in general, please feel free to reach out anytime. We're delighted to set up a time to talk to you. Thanks for watching.